Thank you very much for joining me. Let's get straight into it. Do you get why people are concerned and even angry about the contents or some of the contents of this report?
Of course, because there are two things that you have to bear in mind. First of all, the report will look at details of things which are in the accounts of the government. The first thing to remember is that the principal auditor, the former principal auditor, has given us a complete, clean bill of health on anything to do with the accounts. There are no notes to the accounts. What you have, which is causing concern, is the value for money audit, which the auditor, the former auditor, has done, which does not stick to 2019. It comes all the way to 2024. And that is what has been done in a way that is designed to create the angst that people are feeling, not fairly, to identify why we've made payments, which have been done always with on the basis of legal advice, on the basis of advice from officials, and approved because they are proper payments, but presented in what I describe as a tabloid way, which is designed to be inflammatory and is designed to be biased against the GSLP in ways that I will show. I have today presented a motion to the Parliament in which I call for the Parliament to reject parts of the report which are biased, which are not independently and objectively reached, and which demonstrate that the report should not be relied upon. But I, of course, get that if you pour napalm on people's views of what is happening and you inflame views in the way that the report is clearly designed to do, contrary to the constitutional role of the former principal auditor, of course, I get that people are concerned and upset.
Would you agree with the principal auditor in having raised matters beyond the scope of the 2018-19 report? He's done so because he's raised matters before in his previous report, and he's demonstrating that these matters are still ongoing, for example, with overtime levels and levels of ex-gratia payments. And that was the reason for doing that.
So the reason that the overtime issue was raised, for example, is because the government itself, this is not an issue that the principal auditor is raising. The government itself was dealing with this issue. We issued a circular in 2020 to try and control overtime. This is not a problem of the GSLP Liberal government. It is a problem of successive governments. We have changed the way that we do overtime on a number of occasions with more and less success in different areas. This year, we've gone even further. Before the principal auditor's report, you might see that the estimates book has a completely different way of dealing with overtime. It permits only emergency overtime. And I explained that in Parliament when we had the debate on the budget. I agree with some aspects of what the principal auditor is saying there. But of course, it's also true that in some instances, not all, because there is some element of abuse, when public servants do overtime, it is necessary overtime. And that is what we call emergency overtime and what we want to permit. On the issue, for example, of refuse collectors, I announced a deal that we had done to change the way that overtime is charged on refuse collectors. The principal auditor is aware of that, but I don't think that's properly reflected in the report. What's reflected is what was abusive, which is what the government was trying to deal with. And when the refuse collectors were standing outside number 6, complaining that we were making this change, GBC was giving them airtime and people were honking their horns in support of them. When the government was dealing with the issue that the principal auditor now highlights after the government had dealt with it.
There are an awful lot of issues to pick up, so I'm going to try and get through them methodically. Referring back to what you called the report, you said it was sensationalist and politically biased, but the principal auditor's remit is to highlight only serious issues like actual or potential losses of public funds or weak financial controls, lack of accountability, or non-compliance. Hasn't he just done his job?
No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. He has gone well beyond the remit of an independent auditor. For example, he highlights and identifies somebody as a GSLP activist and talks about a payment being made there, which is in pursuit of the settlement of a court dispute, by the way, and based on legal advice that the government was receiving. At the same time, he refers to the fact that the payment has been made to a former government minister. He knows that that former government minister is a GSD government minister. If he were being fair and even-handed, he would not refer to the political affiliation of either, or he would refer to the political affiliation of both. What he has tried to do is a hatchet job on my reputation and on my government's reputation, and it is obvious that any fair interpretation would suggest that that is exactly what has gone on here. The former principal auditor was not keeping to the principles of objectivity and independence that we say as and that is why we have put this to the Parliament in a motion. And the fact that you're saying the GSD were not in power, well, look, if you're going to be even-handed, what you say is, look, the government is settling disputes with people who might support it and people who might not support it. The fact that the government is settling because of the identity of an individual is of an individual who supports the government may be relevant, but it is also relevant, therefore, if you put things in the balance, to look at how many things we've settled. By the way, that's not the only claim I've settled from a former government minister of the GSD or activists of the GSD. One of the criticisms I sometimes face in my party is that I treat people of the GSD better than I treat people in the GSD, in the GSLP. So what you can show is that there is no favoritism based on ideological view. What the former principal auditor has tried to do is to present a case that suggests the opposite in order to do a hatchet job on the government. That's the way I see it. That's what I'm going to say to the Parliament. That's why I presented this motion to reject those parts of the principal auditor's report.
But what if I put it to you, and I don't want to jump to procurement just yet, but what if I put to you the fact that given that your party is in government, the GSLP Liberals are in government, and so any funds going to a party activist should hold up to scrutiny and should go through proper processes. And you admitted,
and they have. And they have, and all. No, sorry, I'm sorry,
Ross, rather than through the procurement.
I'm not going. Ross, I'm not going to let you get away with that, because that is actually to take even further and sensationalize even more the things that the former principal auditor, has already unfairly said. Because we are in government, that settlement, which relates to a person who is affiliated to my political party, went through a lot of legal advice, and it took years to settle because we went through all of those rigors. Because the other party is not in government doesn't mean that we can willy-nilly pay the claims that they have. That also was subject to legal advice and detailed analysis. It always has to be, because that is what shows that there is no favoritism, that you treat both people who are GSLP Liberal or people who are GSD or people who are in neither camp in the same way. Because you could make the argument that if I start giving money away to people in the GSD, what I'm doing is buying them to bring them over to the GSLP, and that would be just as bad. But the way that the report has presented it is designed to suggest that I'm giving money to people in the GSLP. That has done my reputation a really negative turn among people who have previously not thought that we were doing that, because we are not. And that is why I'm telling you that the report has been designed as a hatchet job to damage the reputation of me and my government. And I'm going to take this report to Parliament. I'm going to put a motion on it, and I'm going to take the whole Parliament through every single word to demonstrate and to the whole public that this report is not objective, it is not independent, and it must be discarded. Now, it's very easy in the modern media age to just read the headline and to say Picardo's a crook, which is what a lot of people may have been tempted to do by a report that is designed to do that. It is harder to go through the facts in detail. Now, I hope that all those who are commenting on social media and saying such absolutely horrible things about the government will listen to the things I have to say and will allow me to go through the detail to show that the impression that the former principal auditor has tried to create is not true.
Chief Minister, this is a 500-page, very, very detailed report based on information that was given to the auditor, who has 37 years experience of auditing.
No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
37 years.
No, I'm sorry. He doesn't have 37 years experience of auditing, because for some of those years he was not in that department. For some of those years he was in the employment department as well. So if we're going to look at facts and we're going to judge the government and make negative judgments against the government on facts, let's have all of the facts in detail.
Okay, I'm taking this from an interview. So 37 years, or be it 17 years as the in the particular role that he's in, or the department that he's in. But what the point I'm trying to
not 17 years as principal auditor. Tony Sacramento.
Professionalism.
So yes, of course. But hang on, let's be very clear. He wasn't principal auditor for 17 years.
No, no,
He
I'm
was
not saying
principal
that. He
auditor
was
for
in the
seven
audit
years.
department. He was in the audit
But that's not
department.
what you said. If you're going to interview me on something this serious, you
Okay.
have to get your facts right. And the facts that you put to me have to be right. Because when I'm going to be condemned by people, I will not tolerate it should be done on facts which are incorrect.
In a recent interview, it said 37 years audit experience. If that's incorrect, I apologize, but that's the information that I read.
Thank you.
But the point is that I'm trying to make is that, are you saying the entire 500-page report is biased?
No, part of the report deals only with the government accounts, and a large part of it deals with the government accounts, the numbers. So there's about one section, which is I think section 5.6, which deals with value for money, which is where all the unfair, not independent, not objective value judgments are made. What the auditor said about the accounts, by the way, is that they are perfectly in order, and he doesn't have to put any note to them. So you also have to bear that into account, because all of the accounts of the government have been given a complete clean bill of health for 2018, 2019. That's what people have to bear in mind as well. And when you're looking at payments made, you have to look at all of the issues that the government has to consider when it's making those payments, all of the issues in the litigation, all of the outstanding issues that affect that litigation and that individual. And that is how those judgments have been properly and independently made. And what the principal auditor says, by the way, having had 7 years to prepare this report, is in some instances, well, I asked for information 24 hours before I finished my report, and it hasn't been given to me. 24 hours before the principal auditor finished his role on the 31st of May,
So
we
you
were
are cherry
finalizing,
picking because he said it over
finalizing.
and over again,
No, no,
and there are
no, no,
instances
I'm
where
not
he
cherry
said he's
picking. I will
waited
show
weeks
you
and
in
months.
Parliament that I will go through pages and pages of errors, mistakes, value judgments, lack of independence, and lack of objectivity, which will demonstrate that many of those, if not all of those value judgments that people are now pursuing, are not worth the paper they're written on, and they're not worthy of being called an audit, which is in keeping with the principles that apply to government audits or company audits of independence and objectivity. And I
Is,
intend to do this in detail in Parliament to show that I'm not cherry picking or nitpicking as you're suggesting, quite the opposite.
is anyone who criticized you biased, Chief Minister?
No, some people have their views, and of course it's fair to do that. And if an individual who is appointed as principal auditor and has obligations as to independence and objectivity criticize me, I have to look at whether that criticism is proper or not proper. There may be things which we say, look, fair enough, this was not done in exactly the right way. But what is intolerable is the suggestion that simply because I challenge things which are factually incorrect or which are clearly unfair, I should be told that I simply don't accept criticism from anyone. And that, frankly, Ros, is very unfair. You know that you've interviewed me for years now. You can put any issue to me. You expect from me the sort of response that I would give you, because the things that I do because I think they are right and I therefore defend them. But it's not that I would not accept criticism. Of all the people that have accepted criticism, of all the people who've held the post of Chief Minister, I'm probably the one who's most accepted that there are instances when we could have done things better. I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be perfect. The government, of course, makes mistakes. But when the government is subjected to unfair criticism, which is not independent and is not objective, I will stand up and defend the government's actions.
So you know that I must give you the opportunity to answer questions that I know people are talking about, and
Of
I
course,
represent the
absolutely.
people, public, and I want to give you that opportunity. You've suggested the auditor may have breached professional standards and that advice is being sought. Can you tell us what sort of advice and what are you trying to achieve with this advice?
Well, no, it's very simple. Look, auditors have to apply a code to what they do. And one of those codes tells you that you must permit the person that you're going to criticize, if you've identified something which you think is not being done properly, to give you an explanation and then provide that explanation as a balance to the criticism that you might give. That the auditor himself says he has not done. So in some instances, he says, I've seen this. I don't think it's been done properly. I've asked the government for information and they haven't been able to give it to me because I asked them, a few hours before I ended my report. Look, in one instance, we were getting requests for information in the days leading up to the 31st of May when Mr. Sacramento stopped being principal auditor. That's not fair. He's had 7 years to do this report. In some instances, we've had a bit more time. We provided all of the information. And in some instances, we may have failed to provide information which we had more time to provide, and we had to take the criticism. But it's not fair in the circumstances where we haven't been able to provide the information because we haven't been asked for it in a timely fashion, to suggest that Mr. Sacramento has acted properly. He hasn't acted properly, and that is in breach of what we understand to be the principles that apply to auditing, whether it's a company or a government.
What do you say to civil servants who might be watching the fallout from this report and thinking, I'm a bit scared to make any criticism here because look what's happening? I mean, are you not creating an atmosphere of fear amongst civil servants and
No,
oversight,
no, no, no,
showing that
no,
there
no,
will
no,
be
no,
consequences
no,
for raising concerns and for
absolutely
criticising the
not.
government?
Absolutely, quite the opposite. My government is the government that has demonstrated that we support whistleblowing. What we support, of course, is whistleblowing, which is proper, which is designed to ensure that something which is going wrong is fixed. What we cannot support, what we would never support, which is improper in any walk of life, Ros, is a kangaroo court style accusation without the opportunity of an individual who is subject to that criticism to put his counter argument. And what is worse, to say that is to say, the former principal auditor says in parts of his report, look, the government may have a different explanation, but I haven't had time to hear what they have to say, so I'm giving you just the criticism. That is not something that civil servants should be worried about. The government welcomes that civil servants should speak out. I'm probably the chief minister who has most encouraged civil servants to speak up and to speak out. So I think the criticism implicit in your question is not just unfair, it's borne out not to be true, but by my behavior in my role as chief minister.
But why does the principal auditor say in the introduction to his report that he faced many obstacles in trying to obtain the information necessary for him to compile the report?
Well, I don't think that that is fair either, because if you read the report, you can compare that to his introduction, and you can see that in 99% of instances, he was getting all of the information that he was requesting. In some instances, it appears he didn't get information, which he did ask for timeously. And we have to look at why that happened and understand why we might have dropped the ball at an official and political level in that respect. But in many instances, he actually says the opposite of what he says in his introduction. He says, I asked, but they didn't have any time to give it to me because I had to finish my report. What he should have done in those circumstances is to leave that criticism for the next report. Many of those criticisms don't relate to 2018, 2019. They relate to later years. They can be dealt with in the next principal auditor's report. But that would not have fitted in with the attempt to do a hatchet job on my government, which is what this principal auditor's report is clearly in parts designed to do.
Chief Minister, let's dip into some of the areas that we have reported on, so that you have a chance to respond to them. The ex-gratia payments. The principal auditor said levels in many cases were unwarranted, unjustified, and not legally required. So I'm going to pick one. It's the biggest one, £660,000 that was paid to your outgoing media director, Clive Galt, who served with the government for 15 years. Can you explain how did you arrive at that figure?
Yes, I can explain that I didn't negotiate that. It was negotiated by officials. I can explain that it is much less than Mr. Sacramento is likely to receive for his ex-gratia payment when he leaves government in the next month or so. And it reflects, as I understood,
Will he get one?
the fact that Clive, sorry?
Will he get one, an ex-gratia payment?
Who?
The principal auditor.
The former principal auditor has been a civil servant for, you said, almost 40 years. Every civil servant who doesn't make a contribution because they're not on a contributory scheme gets a massive ex-gratia payment, which is calculated at 12 times their salary. So if you look at his salary in the back of the book and you multiply by 12, you're entitled to see that that is the amount of his pension of which he can choose to take any share as ex gratia, including the whole amount as a commutation. It's a matter for him. As I said in my press release of yesterday, no doubt, despite his criticisms of the Gibraltar Savings Bank, he might want to consider putting it there because it's the best and most competitive place to put money. But in relation to the other ex gratia payment that you were talking about, I was advised that that was the right amount. You know that the person that we're talking about is not required to retire because of a certain age, because the GSD passed laws that mean that we cannot require people to retire by a certain age, and therefore this was the right amount for him. There are many other instances where the ex gratia payment made is not exactly in keeping with the law, but is designed for other purposes within the public sector.
So it's a retirement payment that was calculated.
Exactly.
And why didn't you release that information to the principal auditor, though? Because he says
We
that he
did.
asked for information and he didn't receive it.
Well, I believe we did provide the information, but you have to understand this happened, that particular ex-gratia payment happened, I think, halfway through April or May. And the principal auditor ended his functions on the 31st of May. So this must be one of the things that he asked for at the very last minute, and it was not possible to give him in that time. But I can tell you of another ex-gratia payment where we paid more than we were required to pay, and which we are not being challenged on, which relates to an individual who's recently retired from the Finance Centre Directorate, for example. There are many where, in the context of the amounts paid, we might not stick to the letter of what is provided for, but is the right thing to do in the circumstances of the department.
There are a lot of ex gratia payments mentioned in the section of the report, 198
Yeah.
to 210. We only selected the very biggest ones, just so that you can explain them. But I mean, that there are.
But that very biggest one would be much less than others who are leaving the government would get if they were to take a full commutation. That would be, for example, less than half, Ross, less than half what a senior civil servant at the top pay ranges would take if they took a full commutation. So in the context of trying to put a spotlight on something, you can create this conflagration in respect of a particular amount paid. Of course, if you ignore the fact that the person who is making the criticism is himself able to take a commutation which is double that which he is criticizing.
Yes,
Double that which he is criticizing.
and the reason I'm
So
questioning
let's put
you
all the facts
is
on the table.
because it's the largest one, and he said that he didn't get the explanation for it, which is why I'm asking you to explain.
Because
I'm not asking
very
you about
likely,
all the
very
ex gratia
likely,
payments.
yeah, but it's very unfair not to ask about all the ex gratia payments
You
and
talk
simply
about them in
concentrate on
Parliament.
one, which is, yeah, I will talk about them in Parliament. I'll go through all of them in Parliament if necessary, because it's important that the public have all the information and are not drawn into a kangaroo court style lynching of the government by a report that is designed to deliver exactly that type of hatchet job.
Okay. I'd like to ask you, we've just been talking about somebody who stood for election in your party. And then we saw another one receiving one of the largest payments. As I've said, we've just
What do you mean somebody who stood for election in my party?
Clive Gold. Clive Gold?
Oh,
So,
in 1996.
yeah,
Oh, I
in
see.
96. Okay, so just moving on to another party activist who received
But you don't want to talk about the people who stood for election and became ministers with the other party. Those you want to ignore as well. So you want to do the same thing that the
no,
principal
no, no.
auditor did.
I'm
You
just
want to talk
picking out
about
what the
people who are
I'm just
in the
picking out the
GSLP, but you
principal.
don't want to talk about people who are in the
Are
GSLP.
they in the report?
Yes, they are.
Okay, well, I don't mind if you want to talk about that. That's your
I've
prerogative
talked
if you want to talk about it.
I've talked to you about that as well. I've told you that in order to provide balance, where you talk about government ministers who have been paid amounts, those government ministers are GSD government ministers. But you'd rather talk about somebody who, 30 years ago stood for election with my party and not concentrate on the fact that there are also payments to people who have been in government for years with the other party,
I,
which shows that there is no favoritism in the way that I deal with
yeah,
things.
I'm just referring to this one because of the amount, Chief Minister. It was the largest one, and
Yes,
that's why
but
we.
as I've told you, it is half of the amount that a senior civil servant would receive at a much earlier age if they took a commutation. So it's designed to stand out and unfairly not set in the context of what other senior civil servants would receive. That's what I'm saying to you. And that's how the judgment needs to be put to the public. It needs to be put in the context of all the facts, not a selective quoting of the facts. Look, if you do selective quoting of the facts, you're not reporting news. You're reporting opinion in order to try and change people's minds. And that's what I say that this report is designed to do. It's designed to create impressions in people which are negative to the government by showing them only a pinhole of the facts and inflame opinions in that way.
We're just reporting on the facts that the principal auditor has presented in his reports, but it's within
Yes,
your rights to obviously clarify.
no, hang on. Because if you were doing that, you would also be referring me to the fact that there are payments to former government ministers. You're not doing that because I've already clarified that those are GSD government ministers. You too are trying to concentrate only on those that relate to payments to people who have been supporters of my political party. That, in my view, is not to provide
Well,
balance.
there
It
is
is to insist on what the theory that is being in some way advanced by the former principal auditor suggests, which is unfair, is wrong, and is untrue, as I will
it
demonstrate in
gives you the
Parliament in detail,
opportunity to respond to the criticism.
as I have done.
Yeah, as you have done and as you are doing, it gives you the opportunity to respond to the criticism that the taxpayer is paying for party loyalty in these
No, but
last.
that is not true. But that is not true. There is no question of this being an issue of party loyalty, because the criticism I have in my own party is that we pay more to people who are in the GSD that are in the GSLP. For example, let me give you an easy example. I've used Keith Asopaldi as a lawyer when he wasn't leader of the GSD. We paid him many hundreds of thousands of pounds when he was our advisor in the Hernandez inquiry. I've used Sir Peter Caruana, the former leader of the GSD, to represent me in the McGrail inquiry. I paid other former government ministers who were in the GSD very large amounts of money in respect of proper claims, which we've been advised should be paid and settled properly. And we've also paid people who are of absolutely no political affiliation, people who provided services to the government, people who have settlements with the government. All of those amounts, the amounts paid to individuals who are or were in the GSD, individuals who are not aligned with any political party, make the amounts that have been paid to people who incidentally might be in the GSLP dwarf, because they are much less than the payments made, which is a demonstration that there is absolutely no political favoritism. But it's so easy to cause a conflagration in this way and cause a huge problem by suggesting, the government is paying its supporters. And as you've said, buying political support. Nothing could be further from the truth. I deprecate that disgusting suggestion, and I will take Parliament through it to demonstrate that nothing could be further from the truth.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I'm glad we've given you the platform to be able to do that.
Well, as you know, I'm away from Gibraltar, but I think it's important that I should deal with these issues, because these are issues that are concerning the public because of the way that they have been presented in the former Principal Auditor's report, which is designed to create that hatchet job for the government. That's not fair, it's not independent, and it's not objective.
Let's move on to RGP offices. The auditor said that there were secret payments. I think
Not
that's
true.
a quote. A secret payment
Not,
to
not
RGP.
true.
And I'm assuming he says secret because he wasn't given details about them. So can you explain what the payments
Well,
were?
as far as I understand it, he has been given details about them. They have been payments approved by the Chief Secretary, by the Financial Secretary, by the Director of Employment. In many instances, they are payments which were transparent to the Commissioner of Police, right? And these are payments that go through all of the Treasury, and there is absolutely nothing secret about them. I believe that we've given information to the Principal Auditor about them. I believe, in fact, and I have to still get all of the details in this respect, that the Principal Auditor approved those payments before they were made. Please, let's be clear. The former Principal Auditor may have even approved these payments before they were made, and if information has not been provided afterwards, then we need to look at why that information has not been provided. But in any event, the Royal Gibraltar Police has investigated all of these payments, including these 4 payments that have been highlighted, and found that there is absolutely no breach of the law in respect of them.
Well, the 4 payments, I think the principal auditor explained what they were. One was an illness. I can't remember off the top of my head what the others were. But can you just tell us in a nutshell what these payments are? Or were
Well,
they?
look, I can tell you that from my understanding of them, they are payments which relate to people retiring from the public service.
Right. Okay. And they're not payments in respect of whistleblower statements or anything like that.
Look, these are, as I understand it, these are statements these are payments to individuals who were leaving the public service. Whether or not they were also whistleblowers at the time, I'd have to check each one individually and then provide the information. And I'm very happy to do that in Parliament when the time comes, where we can talk about whistleblowers, including the RGP whistleblowers who are married to GSD members of Parliament.
We talked about procurement, and you explained that you were satisfied because the report highlighted Fortress, one company in particular, and you explained earlier on in our interview that you are satisfied that the procurement process was transparent and was as it should be, even though it was an expression of interest. Do you want to
So
add?
I don't think I've I don't think I've dealt with that in this
Okay, well
interview
then,
yet.
well, let me
So
just ask you.
there are four instances where the
Yeah.
principal auditor says that the procurement rules have been breached. The government has issued detailed statements which show that in each of them we have followed the procurement rules and achieved the best value for money for the Gibraltarian taxpayer, which is exactly what you would expect. But of course, the allegation sticks, and people say it's terrible. The GSLP have not followed, the GSLP liberals haven't followed procurement rules. But then people don't look at the detail, which demonstrate that the opposite is true. In fact, if what you look at what the principal auditor, the former principal auditor, is saying, it is remarkably, uncannily like what Damon Bossino was saying in Parliament. So another demonstration that this is an attempt to do a hatchet job on the government. It's not independent, it's not objective, and it doesn't look at the information that was provided to the principal auditor, and which demonstrates that the government has acted entirely properly in each of those four instances. Quite unlike, if I may say so, the GSD administration that granted contract completely outside the procurement rules which applied in Gibraltar at the time when we were members of the European Union.
Chief Minister, let's move on to the Public Accounts Committee. The government argues that politicians shouldn't scrutinise civil servants in a Public Accounts Committee, but it isn't publicly discrediting a civil servant worse, as you've been doing with the former auditor, who's worked again for the civil service for many years.
No. I mean, say so, that is nonsense. Look, what we're saying is this. We're saying two things about the Public Accounts Committee. The first is that we have been against the Public Accounts Committee for 35 years as a government, as a political party. For the last four general elections, we have said we will not have a Public Accounts Committee. And so the public in Gibraltar, in general elections, have democratically decided not to have a Public Accounts Committee.
But with
The former
respect
principal auditor, sorry,
to the
so let me
public
finish. No, this is too important. This
on
is
that
too important.
issue.
This is too important. How do you know?
Okay, well, because you
So how do you
won
know?
the last election
No, 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 no.
on the basis
How,
of the treaty.
no, how do you know? So,
But what? Because
Ros, you are pretending to have a crystal ball on everybody's mind that tells you, of all people, why people voted for a political party or not. We issued a manifesto which had 150 pages, and people voted on that manifesto. And the manifesto sets out that one of the things we will not have is a Public Accounts Committee. For the fourth time, people have sided with us and not with the GSD on this issue, who have on four occasions also insisted that they will have one. In fact, for longer, since 1996, the GSD has said they will have a Public Accounts Committee, and they haven't had one even when they were in government. The second point is this. My second point is this. The principal auditor, the former principal auditor, sets out that he agrees with the GSD. Well, what has that got to do with auditing? What has that got to do with the office of the former principal auditor, with the office of the principal auditor, who is there to audit the government's books, not to decide to advise the people of Gibraltar to pursue one party's political policy or another party's political policy? That is to overstep the bounds of what an independent principal auditor is there to do in respect of the accounts of the government. Now, look, my point is this. My point is this. When there is overspending, when there is a mistake in the accounts, when there is a problem, I have to face the music. I'm the Minister for Public Finance, or the minister in respect of a particular department has to face the music because of what may have happened in his department. What the former principal auditor is saying, and what Roy Clinton is saying, is, no, we'll bring the financial secretary to Parliament and we'll bring the relevant civil servants to Parliament, and they can explain to us why they've overstepped it by one penny or another.
Other territories do it. They have public accounts committees.
I do not believe that that is the way to do it. I believe that will create problems in the civil service. I believe people will not be honest in the civil service. I believe we will not have the benefit of civil servants who speak openly to us as they do today. And that is why we have said we back our public and civil servants by ensuring that we will be the ones facing the music whenever there are issues highlighted, as there are at the moment. And here I am facing the music.
Responding to what you said about the public, that the principal auditor should not have made that recommendation, it's not within his remit. He said he was making that recommendation because he felt, as the auditor, that he was unable to apply the level of scrutiny that was needed, and that was why he raised.
Well, look, he might feel that. he might feel that, and therefore he might decide that at the next general election, like perhaps at the last one, who knows, he would vote for the party that's proposing a public accounts committee. But he has no role in advising that Gibraltar should take the party political fork in the road in favor of one policy of one political party and not the other. That is a breach of independence. It's a breach of objectivity. It is to descend into the party political fray, and it is, in my view, totally outside what a principal auditor should be doing.
Can we move on to housing? The Principal Auditor reports that you personally intervened in 7 housing allocations during the reporting period. Did you?
Yes, I did. Exactly as every Chief Minister of Gibraltar has done since the office was established in 1969, the parameters of which is that I have the ability to waive the 1-year waiting period and to give a maximum number of points when people come to see me. People get to see me in cases which are very, very serious. I've been in government for 14 years. It is alleged that in that time, I've used my power on 7 occasions. On each occasion, I would have done it properly and effectively. And what the Principal Auditor is saying here is just codify that. I don't entirely disagree. I think there may be a role for codifying that because it has been done for the years since 1969, since we have had a Chief Minister, on the basis of the Chief Minister being able to do so. Of course, I have the power to do so because the Principal Housing Authority is the Minister, and I appoint the Minister, and I could appoint myself Minister for Housing tomorrow, or I could decide that I should also have that responsibility, which, as the person who holds all of the portfolios after the general election, I do. And therefore, I believe I have, like Sir Peter had, like Sir Joe had, like Adolfo had, and like Sir Joshua and Sir Bob had, the power to do that. And it is done in a proper and careful way in cases which are quite harrowing and horrific. Now, I've heard that Action for Housing has, of course, criticized this, etc. You would expect them to do that. Action for Housing have never said anything positive about the GSLP Liberal government that I can remember, but they would be the ones advocating for these cases, which I cannot discuss the details of, but they are so harrowing that if I was able to discuss the details of them, every Gibraltarian, including people on the housing list who might see these people go before them, would agree that I should use my power in those circumstances.
Chief Minister, if they are so harrowing, why can't the allocation committee deal with that? Why the need for your intervention? Because
well, they may not be able to deal with them in time. They may not be able to deal with them as effectively as I've been able to deal with them.
Is what
well, the public is protected because they elect people who they trust. This idea that you cannot trust the people that you elect, and indeed, with reports like the one that the former Principal Auditor has put out there, which is designed to create in people doubt about how they can trust people who they elect. Of course, you can have these issues.
Are there, notwithstanding.
But I have been elected. Ros, I have been elected on 4 successive occasions, And on all of those occasions, people have known that I see people who have housing problems if the housing problems are sufficiently severe. People have known that chief ministers do this because otherwise people would not be bothering to ask to see chief ministers on housing issues.
So can you explain why the public shouldn't be concerned that your intervention doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a fair process?
So look, what you have to be clear about is that most people who come to see me on housing issues are very disappointed that I don't intervene. I intervene only in the most severe cases where there are instances of abuse, where action is required urgently, where for some reason the Housing Allocation Committee or the Principal Housing Officer or Housing Authority have not been able to act. And I act in a circumscribed way, which is the circumscribed way in which all other chief ministers have acted before. Look, the fact that there are 7 instances of complaints about this in 14 years demonstrates that these instances are few and far between. People need to trust that in these circumstances, where I cannot discuss with you the circumstances that were quite so harrowing in these cases, every Gibraltarian, even people on the housing list who might find somebody might go above them, would very likely have agreed with me and acted in exactly the same way. In some instances, you have to trust the process and trust the individuals that you elect to get you through Brexit, to get you through COVID, to demonstrate over and over again that we care more about Gibraltar than anything else, and that we are prudent about how your money and your institutions are used. Now, if you put a focus on things and you want to light a match and throw napalm on things, you can do that at any time. I could do that with GBC. You could do it with my personal life. You could do it on anything. That's kangaroo court style adjudication, which is not what a modern society like Gibraltar, with Gibraltarians who care about justice and the way that Gibraltar is dealt with internationally and care about how we look after our affairs, will see things when I've taken everyone through all of the detail through this in Parliament, which is fully my intention to do. The GSD say that we don't want to debate the Principal Auditor's report. Well, I hope that they look forward to the debate in September when we'll be able to debate every word of the former Principal Auditor's report.
Chief Minister, finally, I just want to ask you about the concerns that may have been raised that the government is using public funds, taxpayers' money, to, as its own piggy bank, to make the payments in a discretionary way that it sees fit. How would you respond to that?
That is not true. The government has never done that. There is objective justification for many of the millions of payments that government makes every year. To highlight a few and to try and put the spotlight on them unfairly, as the former principal auditor has done, in some instances saying the government may have an explanation, but they haven't been able to give it to me in time because I have to finish my report in a few hours, is the wrong way to judge the government that has given, look, me, Joseph Garcia, Joe Bossano, many of the others who've been there since 2011, Joe since 1972, the others who are with us in government. We've given so much of our time. We give so much for Gibraltar. And to read some of the nonsense that is being written about us on social media and the way that people are reacting to this is just a further demonstration that this report was designed to be a hatchet job on the government, and I won't tolerate it. I'll take this to Parliament. I'll take the public through every word, warts and all, so that people can then make an informed judgment and decide whether, with all of the explanations, including the explanations about why explanations may not have been provided to the principal auditor in the short time that he allowed, or in some instances where he allowed more time and we weren't able to give them, to then make an objective decision about the government, to start talking nonsense about the government being complicit in anything other than the proper administration of Gibraltar's affairs, the proper management of our public finances, which is what we have done in the way that we have grown our economy to an over £3 billion GDP economy and grown our public revenue to near on £800 million.
I realise I've taken up a lot of your time, that you are on holiday, but I just want to ask you if
you're Chief Minister of Gibraltar, you're never on holiday and you're always answerable to the people of Gibraltar.
Well, if you were the leader of the opposition and you read this report, how would you react?
Well, look, I'm not going to give the leader of the opposition any tips. He's a man well known for failing to score against an open goal. So I will allow him to continue with his tactics and won't be giving him any advice. If you can understand that my advice is for the next leader of the GSLP Liberals, not to the leader of the GSD, although he was previously the leader of the PDP as well.
And you once criticised Sir Peter Caruana when he was Chief Minister as being very controlling. So what do you say to people who level that same criticism at you, that if you read the report, all roads lead to Fabian Picardo?
Well, the report is about my ministry. So it's got nothing to do with control. I'm the Minister for Public Finance. This is a report into the Ministry of Public Finance's administration of the public finances of Gibraltar, which gives us, by the way, a complete clean bill of health. If you look at the detail of this, there is a note in there that says there is nothing untoward in the 2018-2019 accounts. So I'm very pleased with that part of the finding, which is the technical finding, which is where the principal auditor goes in respect of the accounts of Gibraltar, not the value for money audit. So I don't think it's got anything to do with control. I think it's to not understand what the principal auditor's report is about, to suggest that because all roads lead to number 6, which is where the Treasury is, which is my responsibility as Minister for Public Finance, that somehow shows I'm controlling. I'm probably the Chief Minister that allows his ministers most leeway in the administration of each of their portfolios in the way that is in keeping with their views.
Final question before I allow you to just say whatever you want to say. I mean, I think you've covered everything anyway, but we're talking about accounts, and the public principal auditor raised some issues about the governance at the Gibraltar Savings Bank. Can you confirm that, because there is no compliance officer there at the moment, but can you confirm that the government isn't using government companies to borrow money from the savings bank to fund either public debt or pay bills?
We've been debating this for the past 10 years in Parliament.
Okay, that's your reply.
So, no, I mean, let's be very clear. You do you really want me to take that question? Don't you want to rephrase
I
it?
tell you why. Okay, I'll tell you why I'll ask you that question is because of the 10 million that was loaned to the finance company, Credit Finance, to
Yeah.
settle.
We've talked about that in Parliament. We've
But
expressed
you
it. We
didn't
said,
mention the savings bank in
yes,
Parliament.
I did. Credit finance is funded by the savings bank. We've established that in Parliament for the past 10 years. We had the first row about this in 2014 with Daniel Feetham, where we
Right.
told him that credit finance was the company that the savings bank was using to lend money because the savings bank cannot lend money. It's not a lending bank.
Okay, but
So it
there's
does it
one
through a
thing
subsidiary.
I'm just trying to
But
differentiate. There's one thing lending money for capital projects for the betterment, the economic
yeah,
betterment of
yeah,
Gibraltar, but there is another thing of lending money to the government to pay bills. That's a
it's not a
distinction.
bill. It's not a bill. It's a capital amount of a settlement of £10 million, and we've issued a press release on this. We paid 6 million of it back already this year. It's in
Yeah.
paragraph 409 of
So
my
the
budget
question
reply.
is, and it might be a stupid question, so do forgive me, but the question is, the savings bank is there to fund projects for the betterment of Gibraltar. Right? So the question is the savings bank money being used for that purpose, or is it being used to fund or pay off debts? That's the question.
Gibraltar Savings Bank is being better managed now than it ever has been, both in terms of compliance with the Process of Prime Act and everything else, where the remember that the savings bank has the auditor, the accountant general, and the financial secretary overseeing all of the deposits and is acting entirely in keeping with its obligations under POCA and in respect to anti-money laundering rules. The issue with the former principal auditor here is simply whether or not he is entitled to carry out that POCA compliance audit. He is not entitled to carry out a POCA compliance audit, as he himself said in a letter he may have forgotten about in 2022. But what the savings bank is doing is investing in bonds and in debentures, which ultimately may be funding some capital projects, as we've already disclosed in the Parliament, including, in one instance, a capital payment in respect of a settlement where the government has already paid back most of that amount and was something we were debating in Parliament during the course of the budget debate. This is no discovery on the part of the former principal auditor. It's something that was out there in the public domain, which I had already explained. And that management of the affairs of the Gibraltar Savings Bank have taken it from having a few hundred million of deposits to now having close on 2 billion of depositors' money, and that 2 billion of depositors' money is being properly invested to pay the interest that people take from a very competitive rate that is offered by the Gibraltar Savings Bank, and to build up a reserve which is now in excess of 80 million. I think it's 83, estimated to reach 87 million this year, which demonstrate that what we're doing with the savings bank is proper. It's the right way to do things and is producing a rainy day fund for this community, which ensures that we have money available in the savings bank reserve, which wasn't there under the GST, who left us with a savings bank reserve of just over £1,000. So I reject all criticisms from the former principal auditor in respect of matters relating to the Gibraltar Savings Bank. And I hope that when he takes his gratuity, when he retires in August, that he looks at the savings bank as the safest home for that money, as many other pensioners in Gibraltar do, because we offer the most competitive rates and the safest deposits.
Chief Minister, you've answered a lot of the criticisms and concerns. If there's anything that you haven't yet said, please feel free to say it now as we come to the end of the interview. And also, I want to ask you whether you've sat down with the new principal auditor and said, look, this is not how you do. Have you directed to him how, or are you satisfied that he is going to produce a report in the way you feel it should be done?
I've met with the new principal auditor. I wouldn't pretend to tell him what to do. I suggested to the new principal auditor when he arrived in Gibraltar that he should meet with Joe Bossano, with Roy Clinton, with Kiva Sopaldi, with other individuals who understand the finances of Gibraltar, even though we might have differences of opinion about how things should or should not be done, which are policy issues. But what I would say to the general public in Gibraltar is this. This former principal auditor's report is designed to damage the GSLP Liberals. It's not an independent report. Listen to all of the arguments. Do not allow yourself to become a member of the jury in a kangaroo court, which is what has been tried in respect of the way that this former principal auditor's report is being used on social media. Listen to all of the arguments. Look at everything the government is saying, which can be demonstrated to be true. Listen to what I will say in Parliament. And then look, if you're not persuaded by what we are saying, you may take a view in the next general election that you don't want to back us. But be a Gibraltarian. Be fair. Look at all of the facts. Look at all of the data. Understand why your eye is being drawn to something. Take a step back and look at all of the facts, and do not permit yourself to be led by the nose to where this former principal auditor's report is designed to take you, which is to be against the government that has done its best always for Gibraltar, that has looked after public money as if it were our own and ensured that we've administered it entirely properly in every single respect. Be fair, because Gibraltarians are fair. Don't allow yourself to be carried away by a crowd or a lynch mob or a hatchet job to be done on the government.
And let's be fair, are there elements in the report that you think are fair criticism and worthy of your attention to improve?
Yes, there are parts of the report that require the government's attention, which is what the report must always do, where we will be taking action, where we'll be making sure that those things do not happen again, where the criticism is valid. We'll be dealing with those in Parliament as well, but we will be highlighting the parts which, of course, are, in our view, not independent, not objective, and designed only to damage us, in particular in the way that they've been phrased and in the way that we haven't been allowed the time to provide the information necessary so that both sides could be in the report itself, which is where they should be.